Greetings people, 'tis I, 480 Volts, and welcome to another episode of 480 Reviews. So last year, one of the games that I reviewed was Mega Man 5, and I mentioned that in almost every franchise you have your universal fan favorites and your universal least fan favorites, and then somewhere in the middle you've got a game that's just sort of there, that doesn't really get much of an opinion. It exists in a separate dimension that is void of any opinion or emotion. Today, we are going to be talking about the one game of the Final Fantasy series that seems to be in that category. It's not really loved, and it's not really hated. It's just sort of there. That game being Final Fantasy V. Before I go any further, let me just point something out. I'm going to be talking a lot about this game's story, and there's going to be spoilers for those of you who haven't played the game and don't want certain things spoiled. So maybe you still want to watch the rest of the review where I talk about the battle mechanics and all that good stuff. So, for your consideration, I have included 2 timestamps in the description. The first timestamp marks the point at which I begin talking about the story. The second timestamp marks the point at which I quit talking about the story. So if you don't want the story spoiled for you, just watch all the way up to that first timestamp and then click that second timestamp to skip past all the story bits. Alright, let's get going. Final Fantasy V was released in Japan for the Super Famicom in the year 1992, but would not see an international release until 1998 when it was ported alongside Final Fantasy VI to the Sony PlayStation as part of a compilation package entitled Final Fantasy Anthology. I'm unsure as to why Square took so long to release the game internationally, however I once knew someone who swore up and down that it was because of the main character's name in the original Japanese was Butts. I don't know if that's the reason or not, but for the purpose of this review, I will refer to him by his American name Bartz. Anyway, this would be the last time Square would try to hide a Final Fantasy title from the rest of the world, so far as we know. The game would later be ported to the Game Boy Advance in 2006 for Japan and North America and 2007 for Europe. And in 2013, a remastered version was released for the iOS and Android devices. For this review, I will be showing footage of a fan translation SNES ROM of the original Japanese version, but the anthology version is certainly worth checking out, mainly for the sake of the opening and ending FMV cutscenes and the fact that Ferris actually has a pirate accent. Before I go any further, let me just reiterate one more time, if you don't want things to be spoiled for you, but you still want to watch the rest of the review, pause the video and click on the second timestamp in the description, which will direct you to the end of my story summarization. I'll give you a few more seconds. Alright, let's go. Story-wise, this game tries to go for a much more complex and deep plotline, much like Final Fantasy IV, while still trying to utilize the classic story elements of the NES titles such as the Elemental Crystals and the Warriors of Light. Much of the game's story plays out like Final Fantasy III, in that we have a group of friends who stumble upon the Elemental Crystals, after which shatter, grant powers of ancient warriors to the party. The writing of the story was a collaborative project between the series creator and director Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yoshinori Kitase. While Sakaguchi conceived and wrote the majority of the story, which was quite dark and serious like Final Fantasy IV, Kitase attempted to lighten the story up with humor and comedy. As a result, the overall tone of this game is much brighter and comical than the previous title, but still, when the game gets serious, it gets serious. Here's how the story goes. In the very beginning of time, the 4 crystals of Earth, Wind, and Fire and water were formed by the essences of human emotion, hope, curiosity, courage, and kindness respectively. The world was then formed by these crystals and life was born into the planet. Somewhere along the line, an evil power lord named Inuo attempted to control the world by utilizing a powerful and deadly phenomenon known only as the Void. His reign of terror was brought to an end when the people struck him down with 12 powerful weapons and sealed him into the Void. However, the people found themselves unable to dissolve the Void entirely, so they split each of the 4 crystals into 2 separate crystals, creating a total of 8. This in turn split the world into 2 separate worlds, each with 4 crystals in it. The Void was then sealed up into the space between worlds, the cleft of the dimension. Somehow. Look, don't ask me to explain how any of this works. It's called Final Fantasy, for goodness sake. It's not supposed to make sense. Before his defeat, Inuo cursed a particular tree in the Forest of Moor. After 1,000 years during which the worlds were living peacefully, this particular tree manifested itself into another evil power lord known as Exdeath. Like his predecessor, Exdeath sought to use the Void to control the world in which he lived. However, he was defeated by 4 guys, the Warriors of Dawn, who are absolutely not, in no way, never, nothing not like the 4 Warriors of Light. The Warriors of Dawn attempted
attempted to use the powers of the crystals of their world to seal Exdeath, but their world lacked the proper power. So they took him to the other world and sealed him there with the power of that world's crystals. One of the warriors, a man called Dorgon, was reluctant to essentially dump their problem onto another world and remained in this world to watch over Exdeath and the crystals. Fast forward about 30 years, and a scientist from this world named Dr. Sid studies the crystals and develops technology to amplify their powers, potentially increasing the world's natural resources by a great amount. However, this has the unforeseen side effect of causing each crystal to shatter one by one, thereby dissolving the power of earth, wind, and fire, and water. Before the first crystal, the crystal of wind, shatters, the wind begins to exhibit strange behavior. This catches the attention of several individuals, including Galuf, one of the 4 warriors of Dawn, who leaves his homeworld and heads to this world to see what's going on, and the King of Tycoon from this world. The game opens with King Tycoon heading off to the Wind Shrine to investigate the crystal. Unbeknownst to him, he is followed by his daughter Lena, or Reyna in the anthology translation, who fears for her father's safety. While on his trail, Lena meets Galuf, whose arrival in this world has caused him to lose his memory, as well as Bart's, a young wanderer on a chocobo. The 3 agree to investigate the crystal's strange behavior, and after being joined by a female pirate captain by the name of Ferris, arrive to see the remains of the wind crystal, which now bestows its power to the 4 party members. The 4 attempt to save each crystal but are unsuccessful, and the seal on Exdeath is broken. Exdeath returns to his homeworld after causing the remains of the last crystal to attempt to destroy the party. The party is saved by King Tycoon at the expense of his own life. Galuf, who has now regained his memories, heads back to his homeworld to try and stop Exdeath. Fearing for their friend's safety, the remaining 3 follow Galuf to his world to help him. After meeting different people like 2 of the original Dawn warriors, Kelga and Zeza, and visiting different areas, the party tracks Exdeath into the Moor Forest where the crystals of this world dwell. Exdeath uses the crystals to try and destroy the party once again. Galuf stands before Exdeath and fights him with every last bit of his strength while one of the crystals shatters. Exdeath, somewhat wounded, eventually flees with the remaining crystals while Galuf dies. The party, now having been joined by Galuf's granddaughter Kara, or Krilly in the anthology version, presses on after Exdeath, who upon being defeated causes the remaining crystals to shatter. The party then finds themselves presumably back in their own world, however they begin to notice people and landscapes from Galuf's world now present. After Exdeath is revealed to still be alive, the party then learns that the destruction of all 8 crystals caused the 2 worlds to merge into one. Exdeath, now in complete control of the Void, begins to suck different villages and people into the cleft of the dimension, as well as releasing evil monsters that had been sealed there into this world. The party then breaks the seals on the ancient weapons used to defeat Inuo, enters the cleft of the dimension, and ultimately defeats Exdeath, who is then reborn into Neo-Exdeath, a being composed entirely out of anger, hatred, and a desire to obliterate all existence, including itself. After defeating Neo-Exdeath, the party fears that the world will not be able to sustain itself without the crystals. But since the crystals entrusted the party with their powers, the party now holds the 4 essences of life: hope, curiosity, courage, and kindness. And 4 new crystals are birthed into the world, and life is saved. Overall, I'd say that the basic plot concept isn't all that great, but the story is told quite well, if that makes sense. Basically, the backstory all comes down to stop bad guy before he does bad thing, but the events that take place during the game are quite compelling, and Galuf's death is especially tragic. Something I really admire about the events leading up to Exdeath's revival, typically in video games that involve some sort of seal or power source that is controlled by multiple elements, when all but one of these elements are destroyed or collected, the seal or power source remains unchanged, as if that final element is the only line between whatever it is that we're trying to cause or prevent. Like, 3 of the 4 seals are down, but the hold is still in perfect condition. Just don't let that last seal get destroyed, whatever you do! Which then begs the question, why do we need so many seals to begin with, since 1 appears to be enough? However, in this game, each time a crystal shatters, the seal on Exdeath gets visibly weaker, with the first one being destroyed quite by accident by Sid's machines, allowing Exdeath to use his psychic powers to control some weak-minded monsters. These he uses to guard the amplification machine in the Tower of Warus long enough for the crystal of water to shatter. Now the seal is even weaker, and he's actually able to control human beings like the Queen of Karnak. And once the fire crystal shatters, Exdeath is able to focus his power on the last crystal, the Crystal of Earth, until it, having no machines hooked up to it, shatters. The first crystal shatters by accident and sets in motion an inevitable chain of events. We really did need all 4 crystals to hold Exdeath, it seems. I also really like the idea of the world being split apart 1,000 years ago, and both worlds having developed quite well on their own and are suddenly brought together again by Exdeath's actions. I like how the game drops subtle little hints about the split early on, like in both the Library of the Ancients in Bart's world and the Library of Surrogate Castle in Galuf's world, where in both places lies half of an ancient book, and the scholars don't know where the other half is, even though they've searched the entire world. And even though we defeat Exdeath and save the world at the end of the game, game, things will never quite go back to the way they used to be. The two worlds are now one, causing everything to be different for the people of both worlds, creating new ways of life for everyone. Also, I love how the mergence of the two worlds opens up new possibilities on the world map. When I say the world used to be one but was split in two, I don't mean like in A Link to the Past where the dark world was essentially an alternate version of the light world. Here it's more like certain landscapes got divided between the two worlds. For instance, while in Bart's world, the Cave of Jakol has an exit that leads to a random ledge on the mountain. There's literally nothing you can do here, so what's the point of having it? Later on in Galuf's world, there is an underground basement in Galuf's castle with a door that is locked from the inside. The castle was apparently built over 1,000 years ago and nobody has ever figured out how to get this door open. Well, once the two worlds have merged together, you can see that Galuf's castle actually is built in the mountains of Jakol, and the random exit in the cave leads directly into the basement on the other side of the door where you can face off against the summon monster Odin. Or in Bart's world, you might notice this random island shrine completely surrounded by rocky terrain which makes it unreachable. Meanwhile, in Galuf's world, there is a big bridge called, well, Big Bridge, that spans over a huge body of water. When the two worlds are one, the bridge passes right through the island shrine, allowing you to reach it. It's like two jigsaw puzzles that each have missing elements, but when you put them on top of each other, you get the big picture. Something else I really like about this story is the idea of the value of friendship, which you could say is the main value of this game. Galuf, why do you risk your life for these fools? Because they're my friends. Why should we go to Galuf's world and help him out, even though we may never get back to our world? Because he's our friend. Oh crap, Galuf is a king? Does that mean I have to call you King Galuf? Nope, you guys are my friends. Bart, Lena, and Ferris are probably too busy to hang out with Kara. Just kidding, they're never too busy to be with their friend. And I love how Exdeath tries to twist this value of friendship into something that can be used against him. Galuf, if you care about your friends, back down. I told this monster to possess Lena's body. I could have told her to kill you as she was, but I thought it'd be nice having you die at the hands of your friend. At the beginning of the game, it looks like Bart and Lena are smitten with each other, and I found myself yawning at the very first time I played this game at this overly played out, tired old plot device. But surprisingly enough, they never become anything other than friends. One could almost argue that once Ferris comes along, Bart finds himself leaning towards her instead, but nothing comes from that either. People who write stories for movies, books, TV shows, or even games, learn from this. You don't always have to have a mushy-gushy lovey-dovey gag fest, guys. The value of friendship is deep and meaningful enough on its own if it is properly done. The game's ending is pretty good too. Like FF4, you get to pretty much see what everyone is up to after all the dust has settled. It is worthy to note that the ending differs a little bit depending on who is left alive when the final boss is defeated. While the good ending, all 4 characters standing, shows the 4 characters returning to their world and getting on with their lives, if any character is KO'd and is not revived by the time Neo Exdeath kicks the bucket, the ending will show that character or characters getting consumed by the void while the survivors return to the real world. The remaining characters will continue their lives while making some sort of reference to the ones who didn't make it, and then while everyone's visiting Galuf's grave, those characters will be brought to life and everyone lives happily ever after. Except Galuf, he's freaking deader than a doornail. Interestingly enough, the means to break the seals on the 12 ancient weapons are housed in the stone tablets which lie in different corners of the world. There are 4 tablets altogether, each one allowing you to take up to 3 of the 12 weapons, and although the first tablet is mandatory to progress with the story, the other 3 are completely optional. The thing is, at the end of the game, the new crystals are formed in the locations where the tablets had been resting until we took them, which got me thinking, if you don't take a tablet, does a crystal form in that area? Now, I've always gotten the tablet, so I don't know for sure, but would this affect the ending? I'm guessing not, but it would be interesting if someone could verify that for me. Now let's talk about the main characters. Like FF1 and 3, this game focuses on a group of 4 characters who are inseparable for 97% of the game. Ferris is a little late joining, Galuf is eventually replaced by Kara, and there are a few other times where one or more of the party members are absent, but for the most part, you're stuck with these guys throughout the game. Sadly, these guys, while having distinct origins and backstories, don't really have much in the way of personality other than a few distinguishable quirks. Bart, the holder of the spirit of curiosity and the only one who isn't of royal blood, is essentially the main character if this game can truly have just one. At the start, he's simply a lone wanderer who likes to ride around on his chocobo and do his own thing, and probably only agrees to go with Lena just because she's a pretty girl. Once the remains of the first crystal grant the team their powers, Bart now feels obligated to try and save the world, like it's the least he can do for this power. Later on, Bart learns that his father, Dorgon, who had passed away a few years prior, was one of the 4 original Warriors of Dawn from Galuf's world, making Bart, like Cecil, Castle, a hybrid between worlds, if that counts for anything, considering both worlds used to be one anyway. Out of all of them, Bart's has the least amount of personality. His most distinguishing quirk is that he's afraid of heights due to an incident that occurred when he was a child. Princess Lena, the holder of the spirit of kindness, starts the adventure just trying to find her father, for whom she is worried, although she does recognize that without the crystals to sustain it, the world will eventually become unlivable, and hopes to find them before they shatter. She's definitely the most gentle of the team, possibly even the most vulnerable, but she's quite capable of handling herself. Imagine that, for the first time in video game history, the princess doesn't need to be saved by the dashing young hero, and in fact fights alongside him. Aside from that, her only quirk is her love for animals, particularly dragons, for whom she puts herself at extreme risk to save twice in the game. This is later revealed to be due to the fact that when she was younger, her mother became fatally ill and could only be saved with the tongue of a dragon. Lena at first wanted to kill the royal dragon of Tycoon to acquire this panacea, but her matron reminded her that this was the only dragon left alive in the world, and the queen surely would not want to live at the expense of its life. Since then, Lena is reminded of her mother whenever she sees a dragon and does whatever she can do to keep it alive, perhaps feeling that this, in some small way, makes her mother's death less pointless. While visiting Tycoon Castle, it is clear that Lena is very much loved by her people. Ferris, the holder of the Spirit of Courage, is a pirate captain. At first, she only agrees to help the team out of curiosity, as she finds it interesting that Lena wears a pendant very similar to her own. After seeing a glimpse of Lena's father, King Tycoon, she becomes very much invested in the team. She has lived most of her life with pirates and has no memory of her life before the pirates found her. Later at Tycoon Castle, when Lena's old matron explains that the king actually had another daughter named Sarisa, who disappeared a long time ago, Lena puts the pieces together and realizes that Ferris is in fact her older sister, Princess Sarisa. At first, Ferris denies this, but after finally being reunited with King Tycoon during his last moments, she accepts it. Still, she never gives up her pirate nature that she's lived with for the majority of her life, and even though she does genuinely care for Lena, she makes it clear that she has no interest in being a princess. Galuf, the holder of the Spirit of Hope, is one of the original 4 Dawn Warriors who helped defeat Exdeath 30 years prior. A king in his own world, he travels to Bart's world to investigate the strange behavior of the crystals. However, his arrival causes him to lose his memory. Can I just be honest here? I've always hated this overused, cliched plot device, and I'm sorry to say that although this was Square's first attempt at implementing this in a Final Fantasy title, unless you count Yang from the previous game, which lasted about 5 minutes, it would not be their last. Also, other people from Galuf's world, including his granddaughter, come here by the same methods and show no signs of amnesia, so why is he the only one who forgets things? Anyway, as events begin to unfold, Galuf begins to remember more and more about his reasons for coming here. I suppose his only real noticeable personality traits are that he seems to be quite high-spirited despite his advanced years. Galuf is also the third playable character in the series to actually die. First we had Joseph from Final Fantasy II, who was only playable for a short time. Then we had Tella from Final Fantasy IV, who is a sucky character in terms of gameplay. With Galuf, things are quite a bit different. First off, with the type of gameplay mechanics that this game utilizes, which I'll talk about later, you've probably already invested a lot of growth and customization into him by this point. I remember panicking the first time I played this game, thinking, oh crap, there goes all my hard work. Thankfully, Kara takes his place and inherits all of his stats, levels, and abilities, so all of your work is preserved. This time. But even more importantly, Galuf wasn't just some minor character we meet up with at some point in the middle of our adventure to help us out real quick. He's with us pretty much from the beginning. We're right there with him as he slowly recovers his memory and figures out his identity. We even drop everything in our world to go to his world to help him out, knowing full well that we might not be able to make it back home. This guy was one of us. He was our brother, our father, our grandfather, and his death always hits me pretty hard. There is, however, a certain amount of poetic logic to his death, as all 4 original Warriors of Dawn ultimately die, Dorgan before the game begins, and Zeza, Kelgar, and Galuf during the events of the game, thereby making room for the new saviors of the world, the Warriors of Light. Kara is Galuf's granddaughter. At first she appears in flashbacks from Galuf's memories, but he doesn't exactly know who she is until she finally reunites with him in person. Her role continues on as an NPC until Galuf's death, after which she takes his place as a playable character. Initially, she was designed to be a very cheerful and energetic little girl, however this doesn't really show too well, as by the time she joins the party, she is burdened with sadness over her grandfather. Still, there are a few moments where her happy demeanor shows, and this idea would be reused in almost every FF title to follow. I love how she seems to form an almost big brother little sister relationship with Bart's, like the scene at Tycoon Castle where she's cutting up with him and making fun of him for being scared of heights. She also has a mysterious power that allows her to talk to animals. This is never explained, but honestly, does it have to be? It's a fantasy world, roll with it. On a side note, let me just say that Kara is freaking adorable. I love this little run around and hop that she does when she meets up with Galuf, and this little twirl she does when she waves goodbye. Oh, it's so cute. Now let's talk about some of the non-playable but still very important characters, starting with Dr. Sid. This is the 4th Sid of the series, and honestly, the first one to be kind of a heavy character. And by heavy, I mean the opposite of the other Cids who were pretty upbeat and lighthearted. This Cid is a mechanical genius and a good guy. However, he is indirectly responsible for all of the crap going on in this game. Even though his intentions were good, his actions are what ultimately allowed Extith to break free in the first place. Cid is forever burdened with this fact for the remainder of the game, and even though he continues to press on and try to help make things better, it is obvious that his guilt and regret weigh very heavy on him. This is also the first Cid of the series not to be an expert on airships. There's only one airship in this entire game built long ago by ancient engineers, and the team stumbles across it quite by accident. The only knowledge Cid has about it comes from what he has read in books. Still, he proves to be quite efficient at giving it modifications, so I guess he's the closest thing to an expert. This Cid has a grandson named Mid. Mid is an enthusiastic, young, aspiring scholar, and like his grandfather, a brilliant engineer. He idolizes his grandfather and hopes to be just like him. I like the scene that takes place between him and Kara, where the two seem to bond over their love for their respective grandfathers. Perhaps seeing how well Mid and Cid work together reminds Kara of all the wonderful memories she has of Galuf. This game also introduces Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Well, to be quite accurate, Enkidu only appears in one battle alongside Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, on the other hand... Oh, Gilgamesh. I love this guy. He debuts as Exdeath's right-hand man and is charged with the seemingly very simple task of exterminating us. A task that he consistently fails miserably at, so much so that Exdeath finally gets tired of his bungling and sends him into the cleft of the dimension. The team meets up with him again in the cleft, but this time he seems more interested in escaping than fighting us. He does what he does best and runs away while the team continues on to defeat Exdeath. Eventually, the team confronts a powerful monster known as Necrophobia, and Gilgamesh shows up, afraid that if he returns to the real world now, he'll be forever branded as a coward. However, instead of joining Necrophobia and fighting against us, he tells us that he enjoyed our confrontations, turns against the monster, and defeats him, ultimately sacrificing himself. Wow, talk about going out with a bang. Even though this game marked Gilgamesh's debut appearance, he has since been added to the remakes of previous titles, mostly the Game Boy Advance ports, as well as appearing in many of the later titles. I've actually heard a theory that while characters in the FF universe like Cid, Sarah, Biggs, and Wedge, who debut in Final Fantasy VI, are different characters with the same names, there is only one Gilgamesh. He is apparently traveling between dimensions, allowing him to visit the different games, but it's ultimately the same guy. I don't know if this theory is sound or not, but I'm on board. Now let's talk about Exdeath. I guess he's okay as a villain, but I do find him quite generic, right down to his reincarnation of Neo Exdeath, who just wants to destroy all existence. Yeah, nothing really new here. Even his name seems kind of generic, or at least cliched. He does have the good fortune of being the game's primary antagonist, the biggest bad guy, which is actually kind of surprising, considering he's introduced to us relatively early in the game, and typically FF titles try to hide the faces of their bad guys. Anyway, if you find yourself filled with righteous anger towards him and a desire to strike him down with vengeance, you can. He's the last guy you'll face. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I'd say between Lena, Ferris, and Kara, who have all lost loved ones to this guy, hell hath no fury like not one, not two, but 3 severely pissed off women. That's fury for you. And also, not to sound too much like I'm copying Ant Dude, even though I totally am, the main villain of this game is a dadgum tree! Hashtag AntDude is the greatest YouTuber ever. And on that note, I think I'm done talking about stories, so if you've clicked on the second timestamp, I should be done spoiling things. Maybe. Let's talk about the gameplay. The battle and growth mechanics are based on that of Final Fantasy III, but taken to whole new levels. As was the case in that game, your characters start this adventure out completely bare. Once the first crystal is shattered, you now have access to different job classes. As more crystals shatter around the world, more jobs are unlocked. From the heavy physical fighters like knights, mystic knights, samurais, and dragoons, to the agile and stealthy fighters like thieves, ninjas, bards, hunters, and monks, to the magic users like black, blue, red, white, and time mages, summoners, and geomancers, you have a lot of options to choose from. Unlike FF3, switching jobs here does not require capacity points. You can switch jobs outside of battle on a whim whenever you'd like. As before, the different jobs determine what type of equipment each character can wear, but it doesn't stop there, oh no. This is where the gameplay shines. While assigned to specific job classes, characters now earn ABP, ability points, at the end of battles. After enough ABP, the characters level up their jobs. Each job class comes with an array of abilities or attributes, and upon leveling up a job class, the character receives one of these abilities or attributes. Then, when you want to switch to a different job, you can assign one of those abilities or attributes to that character so they can access it while in a completely different job. How'd you like to be a white mage with the ability to use your bare fists like a monk? Go for it. How'd you like to be a thief with some black magic under your belt? Go for it. And if all else fails, you can always switch back to being bare, in which you can equip any weapon or piece of equipment in your inventory and assign 2 abilities that you've learned. Now you can fully deck yourself out in heavy armor with the ability to use white magic while holding a weapon in each hand like a ninja. ninja. Note that when switching to bear, learned attributes are automatically available to the character, like the ninja's two-handed skill, the thief's dash and auto caution abilities, the monk's bare-fisted capabilities, and the knight's buffed HP, assuming the character has completely mastered these jobs, and all you have to worry about assigning are the commands themselves, like summon, X-fight, jump, steal, throw, and the likes. There's even a super special job class called Mime, which puts some limits on the character's equipment but makes them even more customizable. Basically, the Mime has one command by default, the Mimic command, and the Fight and Item commands actually have to be assigned. And I know what you're thinking, why is making the Fight and Item commands something you assign a good thing? Because if you decide to forego the Fight and Item commands entirely, you can assign not 1, not 2, but 3 learned commands to your character. You know what that means? Abusive customization just got abusive-er. As for the Mimic command, it simply repeats or mimics the last character's move. Say Bart's used a Cure 3 on everybody, and then you chose the Mimic command as Ferris. Not only is she going to use a Cure 3 on everyone, but at no MP cost. You have no idea how broken this can be if you let it. Just watch out. That Mimic command can mess you up if you're not careful. It only repeats the very last move that was made by a character. For example, when a Mystic Knight's HP drops into critical levels, he will automatically cast Magic Barrier around himself, essentially Shell. Even though it doesn't use up his turn, it still counts as a move. So maybe you had your summoner cast Bahamut, and you immediately have a Mime choose the Mimic command. Now let's say that before the Mime executes the command, the enemy you're facing unleashes a devastating attack that puts your Mystic Knight into critical HP, causing him to cast Magic Barrier around himself. Well, guess what? The Mime is going to mimic just that, casting a barrier around herself, as it was technically the last move. Also, defending counts as a move and will thus be mimed if the timing is off, so watch out. All of this being said, the job system is quite abusive and well executed. One thing about Final Fantasy IV that I wasn't too fond of that I completely forgot to talk about in my review is how little replay value there is in that game. Don't get me wrong, I love the game and will play it again and again just for the sake of playing it, but there is no room for experimentation. And even though I lauded the game's very straightforward battle mechanics and how it focused primarily on having high levels, there's really only one way to play it. But in this game, you could probably play it 70 different times and play it a little differently each time simply because of the insanely huge amount of customization you have at your disposal. I personally love combining different abilities, such as the Hunter's X-Fight command with the Ninja's two-handed ability, essentially allowing the character to attack an enemy or group of enemies 8 times. Though different players with different skills and tastes will most likely set up their job classes in a particular formation that they will use whenever they play the game. Nothing wrong with that by any means, in fact, I'm one of those people. I know which job classes I like and which classes I never use. In an ironic contrast to one of the crappiest characters in Final Fantasy IV, let me just go ahead and say that the Bard class in this game is insanely useful. The active time battle system introduced in FF4 returns in this game, only now we have a visible meter on the screen which lets you see when your character's turn is coming up. So that's nice. The row system works just like it did in FF3. Back attacks return, but the Thief job class comes with an ability you can learn called Caution, which negates all back attacks. White, black, and time magic spells do have to be bought or picked up like the old NES games, but this time you only have to acquire them once, and any character that switches to a magic class can use them. As for blue magic, which is new to the series, your blue mage, or at least someone with the blue mage learning ability, has to be hit by a blue magic spell cast by an enemy, and then they will learn it and be able to cast it. Some of these spells are hard to learn. Basically, it has to hit the blue mage and it has to work on them. There's a spell called Level 5 Death that targets all enemies with a level multiple of 5 and insta-kills them. In order for the blue mage to learn this, he'll need to be at a level multiple of 5 to even be affected by this spell, which will of course kill him. Then you need to quickly revive him before killing the enemy. Then you need to kill the enemy before he kills your blue mage again. Not to mention, because of how your characters stick around each other throughout most of the game, chances are that they're all around the same levels, and if an enemy uses the spell when your entire team is at a level multiple of 5, well, that's a big fat game over screen for you. So before learning this spell, I'd advise killing off one particular character and have everyone else level up a few times before reviving him, and when that character is at a level multiple of 5 and everyone else isn't, go for the spell. Fortunately, only one blue mage has to learn a spell, then everyone else who is a blue mage can use it. I've actually heard a fair amount of people complain or at least remark on the difficulty level of this game, but honestly I'm willing to bet that these people who say the game is too hard are the same people who don't make use of the blue mage, chemist, bard, and thief classes. Well, I'm semi-joking. My point is that the game can be as difficult or as easy as you make it. However, there are a few bosses and enemies that are admittedly very hard no matter what you do, so yeah. Overall, this game's difficulty is kind of all over the place, sometimes being babishly easy and then turning right around and eating you alive. Learning the ins and outs of the different job classes and applying them will make things a lot smoother for you in the long run. We've only got a handful of chocobos in this game as opposed to having chocobo locations all over the world. Bartz has his yellow chocobo named Boko, and later on the team discovers a black chocobo which can fly. There is no white chocobo this time. Oh well. There's also no fat chocobo, as limited inventory space is no longer a problem. Finally! I've actually heard that the chocobo summon, which is just a chocobo kicking your enemies, has a random chance of summoning the fat chocobo, who I guess drops on top of all enemies. However, I've never seen it, so yeah. We've also got Moogles in this game. Remember Moogles? Those things that were introduced in Final Fantasy III and I completely forgot to talk about because I have the greatest memory known to mankind? Yeah, so they're basically just white, puffy little creatures with little pink dragon wings that run around saying, "Kupo! Kupo!" We've also got a fair amount of side quests to undertake towards the end of the game. The final area is not too terribly difficult. It's mildly more interesting than FF4's final area, but boy does it love its boss fights. You can also fight two optional bosses in the final area known as Omega and Shinryu, both of which are extremely difficult. As for the final boss, when your jobs and abilities are properly set up, it's not too difficult, but if you don't know what you're doing, this boss will buy you. The graphics are quite good. Don't let the fact that the world map, towns, and townsfolk sprites are all the same tired old designs from the previous games fool you. Some of these backgrounds are quite beautiful. Let me just go ahead and say that I love Bahamut's model design, and Exdeath's battle portrait is pretty cool as well. In the previous games, each character or job class essentially had two sprites, a tiny sprite for the walking around segments and a slightly more detailed sprite for the battle screens. In this game, each character has 22 different battle sprites, one for each job class, except Galuf, who only has 21. I applaud the sprite designers for their dedication and effort. Let me also just say that Kara's different job outfits are insufferably adorable. Look at her little white mage costume, she looks like a Moogle. Look at her little Geomancer cap. Look at her as a berserker, she's straight up wearing a onesie. Oh, she's so adorable. Let me also just say that Ferris looks absolutely gorgeous in her royal princess dress. And while I'm at it, OMG, Lena's pink hair. Okay, I'm done gushing over the girls now. I also really love the little surprise animations that the characters do, with their eyes all bugged out and their mouths open. It's extremely over the top, but I love it. I also love this ending sequence with the dragon and chocobos. The chocobos do look a little odd, but it's a nice change of pace from the usual chocobo models, and the dragon looks fantastic. This game is a killer soundtrack as well, composed, yet again, by Nobuo Uematsu. Some pieces here and there are a bit dull, but overall, it's great. I love the Cursed Lands theme, the Harvest theme, the Mountain Music and Castle Tycoons theme, and the theme of the steamship and Bartz's hometown are some of my favorites in the entire franchise. Like the previous title, this game has its own theme, the main riff of which plays quite a bit throughout the adventure. Both Lena and Ferris have their own themes. Lena's is soft, ambient, and very peaceful, while Ferris's theme is obviously meant to reflect her pirate lifestyle. Exdeath's theme is not nearly as good in my opinion as Golbez's theme, but it's still very foreboding and definitely keeps you on your toes when you're getting too relaxed and comfortable. The main riff of Exdeath's theme plays throughout many different instances as well, including some of the battle themes, of which there are 5. The standard battle music is the same type of battle music we've heard from the beginning of the franchise, while the boss music is kinda generic and bland to me, although it does flaunt the main riff of Exdeath's theme. Gilgamesh has his own special battle music that plays in the fights with him. I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but in case you aren't, it's freaking amazing. I also really love the music that plays in the fights with Exdeath, and the final boss theme isn't too shabby either. We've also got 2 new versions of the Chocobo theme, one for riding Boko, which isn't too different from FF4's arrangement, and a sort of rumba version for riding the Black Chocobo. There's even a special theme for the Moogles, which is quite cartoony and happy. The entire ending, which includes the main theme of the franchise, is quite beautiful and well arranged. In short, Uematsu's geniusness was finally starting to show through. I can't emphasize enough how amazing the steamship and Bart's hometown's themes are. Production-wise, it's pretty good too. Everything sounds very full, and that pesky pitch problem I mentioned in FF4 is completely absent from here. In my not-so-humble opinion, this game is severely underrated. Most people are busy debating FF7 versus 6, passionately defending 8, and violently bashing 13. And even though a handful of people give credit to 4 and 9, 5 gets almost no discussion time at all. I don't even care if you decide you don't like the game, I just wish it had more consideration. I suppose it's only natural. FF1 was the first title, 2 and 3 were the ones that nobody outside of Japan knew existed, 4 was the first game of the SNES, 6 was the last, 7 is the universal fan favorite, 8 is the one that really made some questionable decisions, 9 is the much awaited return to roots, as well as being the last one on the PlayStation, 10 is the first one to be on the PS2, and so on and so forth. 5 is just sort of there. There's no distinct gimmicks connected to its market or release to make it stand out from the others, which is really a shame when you consider how polished and solid the game really is. I urge you to check this game out if you haven't already. Maybe you'll decide it isn't your cup of tea, which is perfectly okay, that's your prerogative, but at least give it a chance. The story, while not anything amazing, is told quite well, the job system takes a little getting used to but is highly abusive if you learn it, the graphics are nice, and the music is rock solid at the very least. There's simply a lot to love about this game. It's kind of hard for me to give it a position on the list. As of late, I've been calling it my 5th favorite with 4 as my 4th, but there are some days when I like this game just a little bit more than 4. All in all, a wonderful game.
Well, that was Final Fantasy V, everybody. Wonderful game. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reviewing it. I turned out having a lot more to say about it than I thought I would, but there you go. That just makes me all the more excited for the next game in the series, Final Fantasy VI, which is one of my all-time very favorite games ever. So thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please, like, comment, subscribe, share, do what, all that stuff that you're supposed to do, I guess. I don't know if you guys actually do it or not. I tell you to, and I don't know if you do. But I'll see you all next time. Pieces.